Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back again to bring you Healing Heroic Nighthold Part 2, running through Tichondrius, Botanist, Star Auger, and then finally Elisande. A lot of these fights are actually a lot more in-depth, there's a lot more stuff happening, and I really like the ramp-up in difficulty that you're kind of getting. But starting it off with Tichondrius, this fight starts off and kind of looks like there's a lot of spot healing, there's a lot of AoE, and it kind of looks like it's very troublesome to actually keep up. But as you get further into the fight and as you kind of take a look at some of the mechanics and stuff like that, it's actually very, very nice, kind of what you can pull off with it. So going into some of the basic mechanics and stuff like that, you have the Brand of Argus. This goes out for our 30-man win effort on 2 people. And, of course, it'll deal damage when you clump up with the other people, and it'll explode, and the damage done is based off of your proximity to the explosion. So what we did is we almost always had somebody who could blink. We designated any of the mages, druids, or even just a mobile hunter or anything like that who could get into melee quickly. We designated them, jump into melee right away. They exploded a little bit while later. You know, we had a ranged explode, or one or the other. So we always had one explosion in melee, one explosion in range, was no problem. Makes life way, way easier to deal with. From this fight, a lot of it will be focusing on the plague that'll be going out. Tichondrius will designate certain players to have a plague on them. You just move on to one side of the room. We just went to the left side of the room, everybody that had plague on them. And there's a little light spread for that. It doesn't even really matter that much if you're standing over each other because you're going to have the plague until you go into the downstairs phase. So plague will go on you. Later on, he will target you with a swarm, which will deal just some light damage on you. But if anybody that does not have plague on them gets in front of you when the swarm goes off, they also get plague, which is not good. So just move off to the side of the room, you know, heal through it. It's usually some pretty light damage and stuff like that. They'll need some spot heals from time to time, but otherwise, it's not too bad. The other big thing for the first phase is just the echo of the void that'll be coming out. And again, it's just you have to hide behind pillars very quickly. The pillars will be soaking up the damage. You can't have everybody behind one pillar because it can only soak up so much damage. So just spread out, make sure you're all getting underneath pillars. You can split melee between 2 pillars. Ranged, you'll have the range that are having the plague on them, range that don't have plague on them. You know, pretty easy to distribute for that one. And then finally, you go into the illusionary night phase. So it's kind of like the downstairs phase, the shadowy phase, and there's a laser going on, and there's also bats everywhere. So the biggest thing is you need to get this buff as fast as you can that drops off the bats. So there's a buff that drops off the bats that is Essence of Night, and it'll give you increased damage or increased healing, but it'll also give you increased mana regen. So it's extremely, extremely important to get. But the problem is, ideally, you'd like to get your DPS to get this buff so they can kill more bats, everybody gets more buffs, everyone's happy. It doesn't always work out that way. So keep that in mind. It doesn't always work out that way that you'll be able to get the buffs. So generally what we found is, you know, get all the bats in together, try to AoE them down as best as you can, try to pick them up as fast as you can, grips, anything to get them into the group as fast as possible. But you really got to fight for those buffs. You know, in my weak auras, you'll see, it'll be like a nice little marker to say, oh, I have the buff on me. So the faster that I get it, because again, the duration goes on you immediately, or the duration doesn't start ticking down until you leave the phase. So if you get it immediately once you enter Illusionary Night, you have, what, 10, 12 seconds or something like that before the duration even starts, where you're having that increased mana regen. So the increased mana regen is about 2%, and it actually starts regenning very, very quickly, so you got to make sure that you're not overcapping on your mana or anything like that. So dumping mana really, really hard can be really, really strong, just in general in this fight. It's very, very nice. Of course, you'll go through this. We went through it twice. It just depends on how good your DPS is, how big your group is, and things like that. The only other really big thing before this all just kind of repeats again is the Burning Soul debuff. So one of the ads that comes out, we don't really have to worry about ads too much in this fight. There'll be a debuff that'll go on the tanks, and usually they're pretty good about just kiting them out, and they won't take much of any damage at all because it'll be the focus of the ranged DPS just to be killing those ads. But the end of the phase, that one ad will come out and start casting a Burning Soul debuff, and that'll be on the healers. It'll be a mana burn effect, and if we dispel it, it'll deal damage to other people. So best way to deal with it, if you get the debuff as a healer, just run out of the group, dispel yourself, and you're back into it. If you somehow run out of mana or something like that, call for somebody else to dispel you once you're out of the group. But get out of the group, no problem, get the dispel, and you're good to go. This fight's great. This fight gives you a lot of opportunities just to kind of bust out tons and tons of AoE healing. and you're able to really reset your mana pool almost many times. So really focus on getting those Essence of Night buffs when you go down into the night phase, and your healing should be a breeze. Moving on to High Botanist, this fight is a lot of fun, but it's also extremely hectic. You have a lot of room to work with, just in general, and then a lot of mechanics that can kind of consume lots of space over the course of the room, or force you to just run around. So the biggest challenge is minimizing your movement, maximizing your healing, and getting into a good position for your cooldowns constantly, so you're going to always be hitting everybody. So one of the first mechanics to kind of watch out for is the Solar Collapse. It'll be basically a ring that will keep on condensing as it bursts. So it'll burst, the ring will get smaller, it'll burst, the ring will get smaller, and continue from there. The biggest challenge for you is just finding the right time so you're not going to be getting hit by it. It deals about 70-80% of your HP on Heroic, and it'll very well one-shot you on Mythic, so it's very, very important to get through this thing as easily as possible. Think about Mario, just once the Crusher goes down, run right under it, and that was what generally worked best for me. People with Predaz will be loving life because it'll be a nice health buffer and stuff like that in case you get hit, but do whatever you can, practice as best as you can, because in this fight it's not going to be forgiving at all once you hit Mythic mode. So, one of the most annoying things on this fight is going to be the parasites that are going to be coming out. It's the Parasitic Fetter. So a character will be rooted, and you need to dispel them. Once they're dispelled, 2 little root lashers come out. And if they hit somebody else, well, they get rooted, and then you dispel them, and then 2 more lashers appear. So the range needs to have a light spread, and really, really, really watch out for this. I believe it's almost always on a range player, at least most often it was on us, but the lashers can also run and target melee players. So if you're able to kite them through melee, that'll be ideal. It's not always possible, but if you're able to run it through melee, get all the cleave down, they'll die very, very quickly. Stuns, slows, anything you can do, knockbacks, all that stuff helps out quite a bit. Especially if you're a healer, you're able to just switch targets, toss a stun on, have any kind of slowing effects. It always helps out. Biggest thing, range DPS, and hopefully the melee, if you can be dragged through the melee, get these down very quickly. But what we did is we just dispelled them instantly. And we had a light spread enough so that people would just be getting away quickly. So whatever will work best for you, get these out of the way as fast as you can. Shouldn't be too bad of a problem. And again, periodically throughout the fight, you have Controlled Chaos, which is a nice purpley explosion that you'll see on the ground, and it'll start with a very small radius, and then it'll be a slightly bigger radius, and then an even bigger radius. So we use that as our cue, basically, to start rotating around the room clockwise. You can do a ping pong strat. You can do various ways to just encounter this, but we just did a clockwise formation. We might do like a ping pong of jumping from one location to the other, but any way that you can do it, preferably. Usually we'll have maybe very light raid cooldowns for this, but more often than not we'll just be able to heal through it. So these usually aren't too bad. And again, don't stand in an easy void zone to ignore and to get out of and stuff like that. The big damage that will be happening is the plasma explosions. So periodically, again, once you get a little bit later into the fight, I believe it's when he summons his copy of himself, there will be a number of orbs that will spawn in the center of the room. I believe it's 3. Every time you kill one of these orbs, you have a huge explosion, deals a lot of damage to everybody, and the next explosion, if 2 of them go off at the same time, the damage is doubled. So pop one, wait for the debuff to fall off, pop another, wait for the debuff to fall off, pop another. Usually I would use my Divine Hymn on the second explosion, because almost right after the 5-second debuff fell off, the next one just explode right after, so I'd be able to have my hymn for more or less 2 of the explosions going on. So that's generally a good time. You can always have your raid cooldowns going off either here or for the purple explosions, the chaos. Those are just the ideal times and stuff like that. Be very, very careful when you're popping these, and they shouldn't give you too much of a problem. Now, much later into the fight, you will be getting Call of the Night, and this marks several players, and they just start pulsing energy wildly. And the biggest thing is that you need to grab a buddy when you're marked with this. You grab whoever is closest to you, because it's kind of random as who's going to get marked. So grab a buddy that is not somebody else that also has Call of the Night. You want to stay away from anybody that has Call of the Night, and you always want to have a buddy. Grab your buddy. Your buddy is now going to run with you and follow you everywhere, because if you don't have a buddy, you pulse the raid. So you really just need one buddy. They're going to take a little bit of damage. You'll take a little bit of damage. The alternative is you don't have a buddy, or you run next to somebody who also has Call of the Night, and you just pulse the raid and very, very easy to kill the raid. So grab a friend, they'll follow you for the duration of that, and it won't be much of a problem. Some spores kind of come out a little bit later in the fight, and some of the tank damage can ramp up over the course of the fight, but in general, you're really focusing on the big explosions that are going to be coming from the chaos and from the plasma, focusing on just dodging any of the lashers and bringing them into melee whenever possible to be cleaved down a little bit better. And generally, for a healer, this fight isn't too difficult. Really just want to be focusing on the instant dispels, helping out wherever you can with the lashers. That's usually what gives most guilds the most problem on this fight. And accomplish those, that'll be a breeze. Next up, we have Star Auger Atreus. In this fight, for a healer, from a healer perspective, there's a lot of things that can kill tanks, there's a lot of things that can kill melee, but from a healer perspective, this is actually a pretty relaxing fight, and in some ways it's kind of a boring fight, where a lot of the damage is going on spot healers, so it's actually a pretty good fight for priest in general, for holy priest in general, or other spot healers, kind of like a paladin or something, but there's not a ton of AoE raid-wide damage if you're doing the things correctly. So the biggest gist of it is that he will take you to kind of different planets, and the mechanics for what he does are enhanced or are changed by them. So you start off on the icy planet and you get an icy ejection. Basically, you are dealing a little bit of frost damage to yourself, and you're constantly being slowed, so you just got to get out of the group. Before you get completely slowed, you shatter, you deal a little bit of damage to yourself, and then you can get the run back in. It's an AoE burst, of course, with shatter once the duration ends, so got to get out as fast as possible, don't pulse the raid, not a problem there. A lot of the melee might be taking some intermittent damage and things like that, just as they are absorbing tank stacks and things along those lines. But in general, there shouldn't be too much for you to worry about just as a healer in particular. So the next planet that you go to is a corrupted fell planet, and the ejection changes from an icy ejection to a fell ejection. So the fell ejection will basically just mark players, and they will constantly be dropping fell all over the ground. So again, making sure you're getting out of melee, dropping it in a position that's not going to be on the very ring around the room. You don't want to drop it on the very edge of the room, but ideally you want to drop it basically as close together as you possibly can, in a way that will allow you to run all the way to the edge of the room whenever you need to. The biggest reason that you need to run to the edge of the room is for the Fell Nova cast, and it's just a huge burst on everybody in the raid. The further away you are from him, the less damage that it does. So if you go run out to the very, very edge of the wall, he pulses his Fell Nova, you take very, very little, if any, damage. You're going to get absolutely killed if you're in melee. You'll take quite a bit if you're in range. You get to the very, very edge of the room, as far away from him as possible, you'll take next to no damage at all. One of the biggest things is you want to make sure that you're not having anybody's fell ejections that are covering your path, because standing in the fell that is dropped from that will give you a dot. So as long as you're not having that kind of issue and you're controlling which regions are going to have the most fell, because the tanks will be able to soak up the fell, the tanks will be able to eliminate the fell and stuff like that later on. As long as you're able to kind of coordinate the position for your landfill, basically, for fell, you shouldn't have too many problems with the fell phase. Last phase is where a ad is summoned, the thing that should not be, and he starts casting this Witness the Void. So you'll always have the thing that should not be, the big ad. It will always be away from the group, and more often than not, it'll just be kind of in a corner. And what we generally had is we had everyone facing, let's say, north towards the planets. And we always had the thing that should not be way behind us. So if you look at the Witness the Void, you get feared, you take a lot of damage, and it's a long, long fear. So generally we never really had too many problems with this because it was always behind us, and we never really had a reason to look back on that. So that would be my suggestion. In general, the healing for this fight is actually quite easy. We had plenty of healers, and it actually kind of struggled to find a good time to use raid cooldowns. If you're struggling with Fell Nova, if you're struggling with people on their ejections, you're going to have a lot more damage, but the better that you follow the mechanics, the less damage is going to be going out. So keep that in mind. Really, really keep an eye on the tanks, because they can take a beating on this fight, especially with the ad, especially with just the different freezing mechanics that will be going on. So if you're able to handle that, fight shouldn't be too big of a problem. And finally, we're on to Elisande. Now, this fight is incredibly long, and in general is just really puts the hurt on your mana. But it actually is a pretty simple fight in terms of what you need to accomplish as a healer. The mechanics are not too complex. The healing requirements that may come out and things like that are fairly straightforward. But yeah, in general, it's a pretty fun fight. So the biggest things to focus on are the 2 ads that are popping up throughout the course of this encounter. You'll have the blue ad, which does not move at all, and the pink ad, the purple ad, that will move with the tanks, and you'll be able to pick it up and move it around wherever you like. So the blue ad, when it dies, and again you want to focus these ads because otherwise it buffs the boss, or it protects the boss rather. Blue ad drops slow time, so whenever you stand in this orb, it will slow down time for you. So attack speed, cast speed, movement speed, all that stuff gets slowed down. So generally, you don't want to get in there. The pink ad also drops fast time. So your cast speed increase, movement speed increase, attack speed increase, and you actually have increased mana regeneration, which is extremely, extremely nice. The problem with the pink is that there are charges kind of to it, and it's still kind of enough for debate of how many exact charges there are. We've always had it for more often than not where everyone's able to get in it twice, no problem, but sometimes it is faded away a little bit early. So I'm not sure if it's quite, for our 30-man, I'm not sure if it's quite 60. It might be like 50 or something like that. But generally speaking, you're focusing on the healers. Definitely you're going to have to focus on getting into the orb, getting that regen, because it's essential for just the entirety of the fight to have that much mana to work with. These orbs are also essential for taking care of the ring that comes out, the Arcanetic ring. So she'll summon another ring similar to what we saw on Botanist, except there's no gaps. So in order to get through this ring, you have to slow some of them down or speed some of them up in order to create a gap. Now the orb, the blue orb, will always slow some, and the pink orb will actually speed them up. So what you're able to do is you're able to kind of line both of the ads up together so that the ones, so you'll have like the blue orb first, the blue orb will start slowing some, but then the ones in front of you will get sped up by the pink orb and creating a giant gap. You run through the gap and you're good to go. So that's generally what we did with ours, just in order to dodge them. But fast and slow time are just extremely irrelevant. You're probably going to be wanting for the fast time the majority of the fight, and getting the buff as much as possible because you really, really, really need the mana. Otherwise, on this fight, there's going to be some spot healing that you'll have to do from various soaking that usually ranged players will have to do. Some of the melee might end up doing over the course of the fight. But generally, you just have callouts for who's going to be soaking what over the course of the fight. Usually, we had mages who are soaking a lot of the orbs that are falling onto the ground. If they don't soak them, there's a big AoE raid burst that goes on. But as long as you have assignments for that, we usually had our paladin who was able to be topping those people off, or any of the healers that can toss them HOTS or something like that as they're running out. But generally, it wasn't too big of a deal. Just assign one healer to have a focus on them. Shouldn't be a problem. A little bit later on in the fight, you'll have the Delphuric beam that is going to be coming out of Elisande herself, and it'll focus. We had about 4 or 5 people that were focused by the beam at a time. There's a laser that'll show that it's directed to you and where the laser's going to go. Run out of the group. Make sure that you're not fidgeting around too much so you don't burst onto somebody else. Make sure you don't stack the beams together or anything like that. Shouldn't be too big of an issue to deal with. And the final phase, because again, she will be DPS down to 10%. Then she'll go into the Nightwell, restart. She'll, comes out again, DPS are down to 10%, goes to the Nightwell, restart. During her last phase, she uses a couple different dots, a couple different debuffs. The first one is the Conflexive Burst. So you're taking damage over time, and then when the duration expires, then it deals a huge burst of damage to everybody. For this Conflexive Burst, you usually get it on 2 people. You want to have one person go into fast time and one person go into slow time. And what this will do is you'll have one burst very, very quickly, and then you'll have lots of time to be prepared for the next burst. And you can even have that person in slow time go into fast time afterwards whenever you're ready to blow it up a little bit quicker. But generally, if you want the greatest distance between this big damage effect, you just have one that'll have fast time, another one has slow time. You'll be just fine. What you don't want to have affected by time is the Permeative Torment that'll go out, and the damage ramps up on this dot on the player every single time it occurs, so you want to just let the duration go as normal. You don't want to have them, you can even go in slow time as well, but generally you do not want them to go into fast time because the damage just gets so high and so difficult to deal with. But if they're not in that, it's not a problem just to heal through. So a lot of the dots, a lot of the spotty damage and stuff like that on this fight is fairly normal. It's fairly you can kind of predict where it's going to be happening. The unavoidable damage is the biggest factor. Is just mastering those rings, splitting through the gap as fast as possible. So whenever you get into this fight, make that your priority because there's always going to be room for you to be spot healing anybody who has debuffs on them and things like that. That's always going to be something that we're used to. That's always something that we're practiced on. But really splitting through this gap, any kind of buffs that you can give, our shamans have a movement speed totem that they could toss out to help everybody split through that gap. Really makes life a lot easier. On heroic, you should be able to take maybe one tick of the ring if you're able to get through it in one run or something like that. I've had to do that once or twice, but generally you just really don't want to sit in that Arcanec ring at all, just as long as you have to. And really just pace yourself throughout this fight. Let raid cooldowns kind of set the pace for you, so you're always using your raid cooldowns. You're always finding time to just kind of regen mana or use efficient spells to be mana neutral or anything like that, because it really is an endurance test. You're burning down the boss 3 different times to kill her, so take your time with it. Pace yourself with mana. I say if you're progressing early on this fight, don't worry about burning all your mana, but as you're getting deeper and deeper into the fight, you really got to pace yourself. Really got to set a strong cooldown order during the blueberries, during when the ads are out, and any kind of spot healing kind of in between would be optimal. But I hope you guys enjoyed this kind of rundown of the next 4 bosses in Nighthold. I'm going to have a full video dedicated to Gul'dan, because that fight's pretty crazy. And I was really happy we got him down just the previous night, actually. So be sure to check out the live stream, of course. I'm going to be streaming all of my Mythic progression. All of our Mythic videos are going to have their own video dedicated to it. And of course, check out the Discord and everything linked below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, subscribe, share. The works. Love you guys. I'll catch y'all next time.